What if the woman who once whispered in the shadows, the very woman who replaced Diana, had her private words leaked to the world? What if those words weren't of regret or grief, but of something far darker? Something that suggested Diana's fate wasn't just a tragic accident of circumstance, but an inevitability in Camilla's eyes. Imagine reading this line: "I always knew Diana wouldn't last. She had to go. Cold, ruthless, and now, allegedly, public." That's the opening explosion that sent shockwaves through the monarchy, through Britain, and across the globe. A single sentence, scrawled in an old diary, threatens to undo decades of carefully rebuilt public trust. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Think about it for a moment. A monarchy that already teeters on the edge of modern relevance is suddenly thrust back into the darkest chapters of its history. Diana's ghost rises again, not in memory, not in commemoration, but in accusation. And the accusations don't come from conspiracy theorists on late-night radio or speculative tabloids. They come, allegedly, from Camilla herself. Now ask yourself, how does a king, a father, and the man who once risked everything for this woman respond when the mother of his heir, Diana, is disrespected in such a vile, calculated way? Does he stand by the wife who fought so hard for legitimacy, or does he cut her loose to preserve the crown? From the very first word, the public was hooked. The leak, they said, came from a mysterious insider. Some whispered it was a palace aide tired of covering secrets. Others swore it came from someone with access to the royal archives. And still others suggested it was a deliberate setup, a trap designed to destroy Camilla at the very moment she finally believed she had cemented her place on the throne. Whoever released it, the intent was clear: unleash chaos. And chaos it brought. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, holding up placards with Diana's face. Some of them bore simple, searing words: "Justice for Diana." Others were harsher: "Camilla out." Within hours, hashtags calling for her removal trended worldwide. Overnight, decades of royal rehabilitation crumbled into dust. Camilla, once reluctantly accepted, once carefully tolerated as queen consort, became the villain all over again. The third person in the marriage, as Diana had called her, was back on trial in the court of public opinion, and this time, the verdict looked certain. But here's where the story takes a sharper edge. It wasn't just the diary itself that inflamed the nation, it was the context. You see, this line wasn't found floating alone on a torn scrap of paper. No, it was allegedly part of a longer entry, one where Camilla detailed Diana's struggles, her instability, and her inability to fit the role. For years, Diana had been celebrated as the people's princess, adored for her warmth and humanity. But Camilla's words painted her as an obstacle, a problem to be removed. Chilling, isn't it? And if you're sitting there thinking, surely this can't be real, surely it's fabricated, you're not alone. Many asked the same, but authenticity almost didn't matter. The story exploded because it played on every fear, every suspicion the public had nursed for decades. Was Diana's tragic and truly an accident? Or was it the result of forces who saw her as expendable? When you read Camilla's words through that lens, it's impossible not to shiver. Now let's shift the camera to King Charles himself. Imagine the moment he first heard of the leak. He's sitting in Clarence's house, perhaps preparing for one of the endless duties of the crown, when an advisor rushes in, pale and trembling. The words are read out loud. His face stiffens, his breath catches. He knows exactly what this means. Not just for Camilla, not just for him, but for the entire institution. A monarchy already weakened by scandal, by Harry and Meghan's relentless accusations, by whispers of irrelevance in the modern world, now teetering on collapse. And as if the scandal wasn't already unbearable, the voice of his eldest son, William, cuts through the tension. Reports suggest William was blunt, furious. For William, Diana isn't just a figure of history. She's his mother, the woman who shaped his childhood, the wound that never healed. To hear Camilla dismiss her as if her death was inevitable, that was too much. Allegedly, he told his father, "She's done enough damage, father. It's time." Words that cut like a knife. But here's the cruel irony. The very man who once fought tooth and nail to bring Camilla into his life, who risked reputation, marriage, and dignity to love her openly, now found himself forced to choose between her and the survival of the monarchy. Could Charles afford to cling to her, knowing every newspaper, every television station, every late-night comedian would use her words to remind the world of Diana's suffering? Could he weather this storm? Or would keeping her at his side finally break the crown itself? And let's not forget the public's role in this drama. The monarchy, for all its grandeur, survives only because the people allow it. Its power lies in image, in loyalty, in centuries of tradition upheld by public consent. Strip that away, and it's nothing more than gilded ceremony. That's why this leak mattered so much. This wasn't just an insult. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a direct threat to the monarchy's fragile contract with its people. Now, pause for a moment and ask yourself, could this all have been staged? Could someone inside, or even outside, the palace have engineered this timing? After all, scandals don't just break randomly. They break with precision, with purpose. Who stands to gain if Camilla is dethroned? Who benefits if Charles is forced into a corner? Perhaps this wasn't just a leak, but an orchestration. And if so, then Charles isn't just battling public outrage. He's battling enemies hidden in the very walls of his kingdom. The clock was ticking. Every hour that passed brought more headlines, more fury, more speculation. Camilla remained silent at first, no statement, no denial. But her silence spoke volumes. Was she guilty? Was she calculating? Or was she simply stunned? Whatever the truth, her absence from the narrative only fed the flames. By the end of the first day, it was clear something had to give. The royal family couldn't ignore this. Charles couldn't stall forever. And William's pressure behind the scenes added fuel to an already raging fire. Camilla wasn't just at risk of losing her crown. She was at risk of losing everything she had spent decades clawing toward. And yet, the real story wasn't just about a diary. It was about what came next. Because the line everyone focused on, "I always knew Diana wouldn't last. She had to go," wasn't the only thing the diary allegedly revealed. There were other entries, other remarks, other shadows cast over Diana's final days. And once those details began to emerge, the scandal would escalate from personal outrage to national crisis. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if I told you that the diary itself should never have seen the light of day? That it wasn't meant to be read, not by historians, not by journalists, not even by Charles himself. That it was supposed to remain hidden, locked away in dusty trunks or behind the sealed doors of royal archives. And yet, somehow, it slipped through the cracks. Someone found it. Someone copied it. And someone, whether out of revenge, desperation, or sheer opportunism, decided the world had a right to know. The question is, why now? Why at this precise moment, when the monarchy is already limping from scandal after scandal? Why when Charles is desperate to cement his reign, and Camilla, after decades of scorn, finally wore the crown she fought for? You don't have to be a detective to know that timing is everything in leaks like this. Someone wanted the blast radius to be maximum. Someone wanted the explosion to rip through the palace walls and leave Charles with no escape. But who? Imagine the scene. A former aide, long retired, rummaging through old boxes, stumbles across leather-bound journals with Camilla's familiar handwriting. At first, it looks harmless, day-to-day complaints, notes about dinners, frustrations with press photographers. But then, tucked in the middle, the tone shifts. The words sharpen. The pen digs harder into the page. And there it is. A sentence that freezes the blood. "I always knew Diana wouldn't last. She had to go." The aide's hands tremble. The page burns like fire in their palms. Do they close the book and pretend they never saw it? Or do they do what someone eventually did? Leak it to the outside world? Now here's where it gets fascinating. If this was simply a diary lost to history, why would it be preserved at all? Diaries aren't official documents. They're private, personal, which means if it really existed, someone close to Camilla wanted it hidden. Someone feared what was inside. And yet, they failed. Or worse, they allowed it to surface deliberately. Could this have been a palace power play? A rival faction, eager to weaken Charles's position? Or maybe it wasn't an insider at all, but a calculated move from outside forces. People who have always profited from royal humiliation. Think about the tabloids. For decades, newspapers like The Sun and the Daily Mail thrived on royal scandal. Diana's story made them millions. Harry and Meghan's drama kept them alive in the digital age. Now, Camilla's diary is their new golden goose. What better way to revive readership than by tearing open the ugliest wound of all? And once the first paper published that line, it was over. Every outlet ran with it. TV anchors dissected it. Social media turned it into a meme, a battle cry, a weapon. Within hours, the world wasn't asking if the diary was real. They were asking what else it contained. That's where the real danger lies. Because one sentence is explosive, but a series of entries? A pattern? That suggests intent. It suggests consistency. And suddenly the world wasn't just horrified. They were suspicious. If Camilla could write something so cruel about Diana, what else might she have confessed? Did she gloat about Diana's breakdowns? Did she mock her struggles with mental health? Did she hint at knowing things the public never did? These are the questions that ignited the firestorm. And it wasn't just the public. Insiders, historians, even biographers who had spent years studying the Windsor drama admitted they were floored. One commentator said it best: "This changes everything. It reframes Camilla's entire narrative. She's not just the woman Charles loved. She's the woman who allegedly wrote off Diana's life as expendable." Harsh words, but they stuck. But here's a contradiction worth considering. If Camilla truly despised Diana, why would she put it in writing? Diaries are private, yes, but royals above all know the dangers of records. Letters, memos, phone calls, all of it can leak. Camilla herself lived through the infamous Tampongate tapes, where her intimate phone conversations with Charles were splashed across the tabloids. She knew the risk of leaving words behind. So why would she write this? Was it arrogance? Carelessness? Or could it be, stay with me here, that the diary wasn't entirely hers? Fake documents have plagued the monarchy before. Forged letters, manipulated tapes, invented interviews. Could someone have created these entries, blending real notes with fabricated venom? If so, Camilla is both victim and villain. But the problem is perception. And perception is all that matters in the court of public opinion. If the people believe she wrote it, then in their minds, she did. Meanwhile, the palace scrambled. Insiders whispered that staff were ordered to find the source of the leak immediately. Every aide, every archivist, every assistant came under suspicion. Was this the work of a whistleblower? A disgruntled ex-employee? Or perhaps someone still on the inside? Someone who wanted Camilla gone? Because make no mistake, the monarchy has factions. It always has. Quiet rivalries, hidden loyalties, power struggles behind gilded doors. The leak could have been the opening shot in a much bigger war. And here's the most chilling possibility. What if the diary wasn't leaked by an enemy, but by someone close to Charles himself? Someone who recognized the damage Camilla was causing and decided to use her own words to bring her down? Could William, or someone in his circle, have had access? Could they have allowed just enough to slip into the press to force Charles's hand? Outlandish. Maybe. But in a world where palace politics decide the fate of nations, it's not impossible. Picture the ripple effects. As the news spread, Diana's old friends, former staff, and charities spoke up. Many said they weren't surprised. They claimed Camilla's disdain for Diana was an open secret. Others shared anecdotes, moments when Camilla had allegedly dismissed Diana as unstable, unfit, or doomed. Each new testimony added weight to the diary's authenticity. And the more voices joined, the more impossible it became for Charles to ignore. Now, let me ask you directly. If you were in Charles's shoes, what would you do? Defend the woman you sacrificed so much for, or protect the monarchy that defines your very identity? That's the impossible dilemma this diary created. No matter what he chose, he would lose something: his wife, his crown, or his legacy. And just when you think the scandal couldn't get any worse, it did. Because buried in those pages, alongside the infamous line, were other remarks. Remarks hinting at knowledge of events in Diana's final days. Vague, ambiguous, but haunting nonetheless. Enough to spark whispers that Camilla wasn't just cruel. She might have known more than she ever admitted. But what came next didn't just question her character. It questioned her very place in history. What if the most damning words ever written by a royal consort weren't uttered in an interview, weren't whispered on a hot mic, but scribbled privately in a diary, and then revealed to the world years later? The line alone is enough to curdle the blood. "I always knew Diana wouldn't last. She had to go." Not a passing remark. Not a misunderstood phrase. No, an alleged statement of intent. Cold, brutal, and devastating in its implications. When the public first saw it, jaws dropped. Was this Camilla's unfiltered truth about Diana? Was this her way of justifying what millions around the globe have always suspected, that Diana was never meant to survive, that she was always an obstacle, an inconvenience? The fury was instant. For decades, Diana's supporters held her memory close, painting her as the innocent lamb sacrificed on the altar of the monarchy. Now Camilla's alleged words felt like confirmation. Not speculation, not gossip, confirmation. Think about how those words read. Not Diana struggled, not Diana was fragile, but she had to go. That isn't observation. That's execution. And whether Camilla meant it metaphorically or literally no longer mattered. Because in the public's mind, the woman who replaced Diana was now the woman who had wished her gone. The timing of this revelation made it even more lethal. Diana's image remains one of the most beloved in modern history. Her charity work, her compassion, her humanity, etched permanently into the collective memory. Every anniversary of her death draws crowds. Every photograph of her reignites nostalgia. Camilla has always lived in Diana's shadow. But with this line, that shadow turned into a ghost, rising to haunt her at the worst possible moment. And here's where it gets even darker. The entry wasn't surrounded by warmth, regret, or apology. No, the diary painted Diana as weak, unfit, unsuited for the life she chose. Or, in Camilla's view, the life that chose her. In one stroke, Camilla positioned herself as the survivor, the rightful partner, while Diana became the tragic casualty. Isn't that chilling? The arrogance of it? The confidence to reduce one of the most beloved women in the world to nothing more than a stepping stone. But wait, could this line have been misinterpreted? Could "she had to go" have meant something entirely different, something less sinister? Some argued Camilla might have meant Diana had to leave the royal marriage, that she was destined to divorce Charles, that she was never going to last in that gilded cage. Perhaps it was poor wording, careless phrasing. But ask yourself, if that's the case, why not clarify? Why not explain? Why not come forward with context before the fury spiraled out of control? Silence, in this situation, wasn't neutral. It was damning. And while Camilla said nothing, the public filled the void. Conspiracy theories resurfaced like a tidal wave. Was Diana's death really just a car crash in Paris? Or was it something far more sinister, covered up at the highest levels? Camilla's line became Exhibit A in a renewed trial of history. What if, people whispered, this wasn't just bitterness in ink, but a confession? Royal historians rushed onto television, scrambling to contextualize. Some insisted it was impossible that Camilla had meant anything more than divorce. Others admitted, reluctantly, that the words were devastating. One even asked the question that no palace insider dared voice. What if this is what she believed all along? What if Camilla always saw Diana's downfall as inevitable, even necessary? And then came the voices that truly cut through, the voices of Diana's allies. Friends, former staff, and confidants began speaking out. Some said they weren't surprised at all. They claimed Diana herself often suspected that Camilla wanted her gone, not just from the marriage, but from the world stage entirely. Diana feared Camilla's influence, one former aide recalled. She believed Camilla would stop at nothing. Whether true or not, these testimonies only added fuel to the inferno. The line also reopened old wounds for Charles himself. Imagine being confronted with those words, allegedly penned by the woman you sacrificed everything for. How does he process that? Does he believe her? Does he forgive her? Or does he realize, perhaps too late, that the very act of loving Camilla has doomed him and his reign? And let's not forget William, the son who lost his mother in the most public tragedy of the century. For William, the diary wasn't just about Camilla's cruelty, it was personal. Every syllable in that line was a dagger aimed at his mother's grave. Can you imagine the rage, the humiliation, the despair he must have felt reading it? Reports suggest he didn't hesitate in telling Charles what he thought. "She's done enough damage," he allegedly said. And who could argue with him? Here's the irony. Camilla had spent years working to repair her image, years trying to win over the British public. She took on charities, she softened her appearance, she endured the endless headlines comparing her to Diana. Slowly, grudgingly, people began to accept her. And then, boom, one sentence destroyed it all. One diary entry undid decades of imagery building. And yet, The question lingers. Is it real? Could this all be fabricated? The handwriting experts will debate, the palace will deflect, the tabloids will exaggerate. But here's the brutal truth. The damage is already done. Authentic or not, the people believe it. And in the monarchy, perception is reality. If the crowd sees Camilla as the villain, then she is the villain. But here's where the story takes an even more dangerous turn. Because if that one line could provoke such outrage, imagine what else is buried in those pages. Imagine what other remarks about Diana, about Charles, about the royal family at large, might be waiting to emerge. This wasn't just one match thrown on a dry wood. This was the start of a wildfire. And the next diary entry that leaked was even worse. What if the war between Camilla and Diana never truly ended? What if the battle that defined an era, one woman adored by the public, the other despised as the interloper, was reignited decades after Diana's death, not with words spoken, but with words written? That diary didn't just expose a cruel sentence. It reopened the deepest scars of a royal rivalry that had shaped the destiny of the monarchy. Let's take a step back. The world remembers Diana as the young, radiant bride. Shy, hopeful, the embodiment of fairy tale promise. But even on her wedding day, the shadow of Camilla Parker Bowles was there. Diana herself admitted it. There were 3 people in her marriage. Camilla wasn't hidden. She wasn't erased. She was an open secret. And for Diana, that knowledge was poison. Imagine standing at the altar, promising yourself to a prince, while knowing his heart already belonged to someone else. Can you feel the humiliation? The betrayal? That wound shaped Diana's every move, and Camilla's every triumph. Now imagine reading a diary, years later, that allegedly confirmed what Diana always feared. That Camilla didn't just want Charles. She wanted Diana gone. Doesn't it feel like a cruel echo of the past? Like Diana's worst suspicions reaching out from the grave to say, "I was right all along." The press ran with it immediately. Tabloids resurrected old headlines, old photographs, old interviews. Diana in tears, confessing her despair. Camilla smirking on the sidelines, hidden in plain sight. The contrast was stark. The beloved people's princess versus the calculating mistress turned queen. The diary didn't just expose Camilla's alleged cruelty. It amplified Diana's suffering in retrospect. And the public? They responded with fury. Once again, Diana became the martyr, the saint, the woman sacrificed. Camilla became the usurper, the schemer, the one who dared to write off Diana's life. Crowds outside Kensington Palace left flowers, just as they had after Diana's death. Social media flooded with tributes. Hashtags honoring Diana trended for days. The people weren't just angry at Camilla. They were grieving all over again. But here's where the story twists. For years, Camilla's defenders had argued she was misunderstood, that she was simply the woman Charles loved, unfairly vilified by history, that Diana was unstable, unpredictable, unable to cope with the pressure. Those arguments had gained traction. Slowly, people warmed to Camilla. She wasn't Diana, but she was steady, reliable, a survivor. But the diary shattered that narrative. It confirmed the ugliest suspicions, that Camilla hadn't just endured Diana's presence. She despised it. She celebrated her downfall. And here's the contradiction that makes this so explosive. If Camilla truly believed Diana had to go, then every moment since Diana's death takes on a darker light. Every smile beside Charles, every charity appearance, every carefully staged photograph as queen consort. Suddenly, it's not just about love. It's about conquest, about victory. And the public couldn't forgive that. Now let's zoom in on Charles. For him, this war between his wife and his late ex-wife wasn't theoretical. It was personal. Diana's ghost haunted him every day. Every public appearance brought comparisons. Every speech, every photograph, every anniversary reminded him of the woman the world adored, and the woman beside him who could never measure up. The diary made that contrast unbearable. How could he defend Camilla when her own words seemed to spit on Diana's grave? And what about William? For him, this wasn't just history. It was trauma. The diary wasn't reopening a war. It was reopening a wound. Imagine being Diana's son and reading that the woman who took your mother's place allegedly wrote she had to go. It's unforgivable. And if William urged Charles to end it, to finally put Camilla aside, who could blame him? The war between Diana and Camilla wasn't just a battle of the past. It was now a battle shaping the future of the monarchy. But here's a question for you. Could Camilla have survived this scandal if Diana weren't who she was? If Diana hadn't been so adored, so loved, so iconic? Perhaps. But Diana wasn't just another royal. She was global. She was eternal. And Camilla's words ensured that Diana's legacy would rise up and crush her. The more Camilla tried to defend herself, the more the public clung to Diana. It was a losing battle. The press even began re-airing Diana's most famous interview, the panorama confession where she declared, "There were 3 of us in this marriage." That line, once haunting, now became prophetic. Diana had warned the world. And now, decades later, Camilla's diary allegedly proved her right. The war wasn't just reopened, it was Diana's final victory. But remember, wars never end cleanly. For every voice condemning Camilla, there were whispers of doubt. Could the diary have been forged? Could someone have planted the entries to destroy her? If so, then Camilla wasn't just the villain. She was the victim of the very war Diana had warned about, the war of palace intrigue, of public image, of survival. And that raised an even more dangerous question. If the diary wasn't entirely hers, who was pulling the strings? The speculation grew. Some pointed to courtiers loyal to Diana's memory. Others suggested powerful figures inside the palace wanted Camilla gone to protect Charles. And still others whispered about William. Was this his way of forcing his father's hand? After all, removing Camilla would purify the monarchy in the eyes of the public. Whether true or not, the theories spread like wildfire. But here's the truth. Authenticity didn't matter anymore. Once the war was reopened, once Diana's memory was weaponized, the damage was irreversible. Camilla was cornered. The press bayed for blood. The people demanded justice. And Charles? He faced an impossible choice: cling to Camilla and watch the monarchy burn, or cut her loose and save the crown. And just when it seemed the war had reached its peak, another revelation surfaced. A second entry. A new line. And this one didn't just insult Diana. It threatened to expose something far darker about her final days. What happens when an entire nation decides it has had enough? When the very people who once tolerated you, who begrudgingly accepted your presence on the throne, suddenly turn against you in unison. That is exactly what happened to Camilla the moment her alleged diary entries hit the public eye. Overnight, she went from queen consort to public enemy number 1. Crowds didn't just gather, they swelled. Outside Buckingham Palace, the gates were lined with protesters holding candles, placards, and photographs of Diana. "Justice for Diana," read one. Another was harsher: "Camilla out." Now, it wasn't just anger, it was betrayal. People had been told for years to accept Camilla, to see her as Charles's true love, as the steady hand beside him. But with one line, she had to go. The fragile truce shattered. The tabloids fed the flames like oxygen to a fire. Front pages screamed with headlines: "Queen of Cruelty," "The Diary of Betrayal," "Camilla's Words Exposed." Every talk show host, every commentator, every late-night comedian piled on. The narrative was simple. Camilla wasn't just a controversial figure. She was a villain. And villains don't belong on thrones. Social media erupted with fury. Hashtags like #CamillaOut, #Diana's Revenge, and #NotMyQueen trended worldwide. Millions of people shared old clips of Diana speaking softly, tenderly, about her struggles, juxtaposed with photographs of Camilla smirking at public events. The contrast was devastating. The world didn't just see a queen consort. They saw a usurper, an opportunist, the woman who had allegedly written off Diana's life as expendable. Now, here's the part the palace didn't anticipate. The anger wasn't confined to Britain. It spread globally. In America, Diana's legacy is enormous. In France, where Diana died, headlines framed the diary as proof that suspicions had always been justified. In Africa, in Australia, across the Commonwealth, the story dominated news cycles. Camilla wasn't just disliked. She was despised. And that international pressure only made Charles's dilemma more suffocating. But it wasn't only the people outside the palace walls. Inside, whispers began. Senior courtiers were horrified. Advisors feared the monarchy itself was at risk. After all, the monarchy's survival depends on one thing: legitimacy, respect. If the people withdraw their loyalty, the crown crumbles into costume jewelry. And with Camilla at the center of scandal, That loyalty was evaporating faster than Buckingham Palace could manage. Think of the irony. For years, Camilla had been carefully rehabilitated. Public relations experts had softened her image. Photographers captured her smiling with charities. She kept her head down, avoided controversy, and little by little, the public warmed. Some even came to admire her resilience. But in a matter of days, all of that collapsed. One diary, one sentence, and she was right back where she had started, reviled. And what about the politicians? They could smell blood. Members of Parliament began making subtle but pointed remarks. The monarchy must reflect the values of the people, one said. Another went further, warning that Camilla's presence threatened the stability of the crown itself. When politicians start circling, you know the crisis has reached boiling point. But let's pause for a moment. Ask yourself, why did this hit so hard? After all, Camilla was never beloved. People had tolerated her, yes. But loved? No. The answer is Diana. Diana wasn't just a princess. She was a phenomenon, a symbol of compassion, vulnerability, and humanity in an institution built on aloofness. Her death had already sanctified her in the public's eyes. So when Camilla's words seemed to confirm disdain, it wasn't just gossip. It was sacrilege. Camilla wasn't attacking a woman. She was desecrating a saint. And the outrage grew more theatrical by the day. Some protesters staged mock trials in the streets, holding signs that read, "Guilty of betrayal." Others carried Diana's old charity banners, as if to remind the world of her goodness in contrast to Camilla's alleged cruelty. It wasn't just protest. It was pageantry, a counter-monarchy forming in Diana's memory. Meanwhile, palace staff worked frantically behind the scenes. Press releases were drafted, statements debated. Should Camilla deny it outright? Should she claim forgery? Should Charles himself speak up to defend her? Every option seemed disastrous. If they denied it, people would demand proof. If they stayed silent, silence looked like guilt. And if Charles defended her, he risked being dragged down with her. It was a no-win scenario. Even the Church of England was drawn into the storm. Clergy members spoke cautiously, reminding the public of forgiveness, but their tone was muted, hesitant. Because how do you preach forgiveness when a queen consort allegedly mocked the death of the most beloved princess of modern times? Even religion couldn't shield her. And then came the polls. Numbers don't lie. Within a week of the leak, Camilla's approval rating had plummeted to historic lows. One poll showed 78% of Britons believed she should step aside. Another revealed more than half wanted Charles to divorce her. That's not just unpopularity. That's rejection on a national scale. Think about what that means for Charles, a king whose entire reign rests on maintaining stability, order, and tradition. Suddenly, his wife is the most hated woman in the country. How does he continue? How does he stand beside her at state events, smile for cameras, wave from palace balconies when the crowd below is booing? The monarchy is about image, and the image was poisoned. But here's the twist no one saw coming. While the nation burned with outrage, William stepped forward privately. Not in speeches, not in public, but behind the scenes, he confronted his father. "She's done enough damage," he allegedly said. "It's time." Those words weren't just a son's plea. They were a warning. Because William isn't just Charles's son. He's the heir, the future king. If he turned against Camilla, if he refused to support her, then Charles's entire house of cards would collapse. And Charles knew it. He could feel the weight pressing down from all sides. Parliament, public, his own blood. The monarchy was crumbling beneath him. And yet, he hesitated. Because how do you cut off the very woman you sacrificed everything to be with? How do you divorce the partner who stood by you through scandal, humiliation, and decades of waiting? For Charles, it wasn't just politics. It was love. But love, in this case, wasn't enough. The nation had spoken. The people had judged. And the pressure was unbearable. Camilla could fight back. Yes. She could deny, deflect, defend. But every word she spoke, every move she made, only poured gasoline on the fire. And so the palace braced itself. Because the next move wouldn't just decide Camilla's fate. It would decide Charles's reign. But before Charles could act, something unexpected happened inside the palace walls. An intervention that stunned even the king himself. What happens when the king himself becomes the prisoner of his crown? When every corridor of Buckingham Palace echoes not with loyalty, but with whispered doubts about his judgment. That was the reality Charles faced in the aftermath of Camilla's diary scandal. He wasn't just a husband caught in a marital nightmare. He was a monarch besieged, his throne wobbling beneath him, his every decision scrutinized by politicians, press, and even his own family. The moment the diary surfaced, Charles's world shifted. Advisors who once deferred to Camilla's presence now avoided eye contact when her name came up. Senior courtiers, men and women who had served the crown for decades, suddenly dared to voice what had always been unthinkable, that the queen consort might have to go. Imagine Charles hearing that from the very people tasked with protecting his reign. For a man who had fought for decades to legitimize his relationship with Camilla, those words weren't advice. They were daggers. And yet, as the walls closed in, Charles found himself paralyzed. On one hand, he owed Camilla everything. She had stood by him through scandal, through public ridicule, through years when their relationship was mocked as tawdry and pathetic. To abandon her now would be an act of betrayal. On the other hand, the monarchy itself was at stake. Every headline screamed Diana's name. Every protester's chant reminded the world that Charles's past choices had led them here. Could he really risk dragging the entire crown into the abyss for the sake of one woman? Picture the meetings in Clarence House and Buckingham Palace. Heavy drapes drawn, papers spread across polished mahogany tables, advisors shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. Words like abdication, crisis management, and irreversible damage were whispered in tones of dread. Some even drew comparisons to Edward VIII, the king who gave up his throne for Wallis Simpson. The parallel was chilling. Would Charles, too, face the possibility of losing everything because of the woman he loved? The pressure wasn't just internal. Prime Minister's aides made discreet calls. Parliamentarians muttered about the monarchy's fragile contract with the public. Behind closed doors, senior officials reminded the palace that the monarchy survives on taxpayer goodwill. If the people demanded Camilla's removal, how long could the government shield the king from reality? Now imagine Charles in the middle of this storm, torn between his heart and his crown. His face drawn, his voice heavy with regret. In one moment, he might defend Camilla fiercely, declaring she was the love of his life. In the next, he would slump in despair, admitting privately that the damage was too great. That contradiction was the essence of Charles, a man always caught between duty and desire, never able to fully reconcile the two. And just when he thought it couldn't get worse, his son spoke up. William didn't mince words. "She's done enough damage, father. It's time." Can you imagine hearing that from your heir? Your firstborn? The man who will one day take your throne? It wasn't just advice. It was an ultimatum. For William, this wasn't about politics. It was about loyalty to his mother, to Diana's memory. He had spent his entire adult life trying to protect that memory, trying to honor it. Now he saw Camilla's diary as an insult too great to ignore. And so he pressed his father, hard. This moment fractured Charles in ways few could see. He had always wanted William's approval, always longed for his sons to accept Camilla, to see in her what he did. And for a time, it seemed that reconciliation had been achieved. But the diary blew that illusion apart. William's words didn't just sting. They revealed a truth Charles had tried desperately to ignore. His son would never, ever forgive Camilla for Diana's suffering. Meanwhile, Camilla herself wasn't going quietly. Inside the palace, she pushed back. Defiant, outraged. She insisted the diary was being misrepresented, that her words were twisted, that enemies were using them to destroy her. "I won't be a scapegoat," she allegedly snapped at one meeting. Imagine the tension in that room. The king caught between his furious wife and the advisors urging him to cut her loose. And the world outside wasn't waiting. Every day the scandal grew. New excerpts from the diary leaked. Some mocked Diana's charity work. Others hinted at private moments between Charles and Diana that Camilla allegedly ridiculed. Whether authentic or fabricated, it didn't matter. The damage compounded. And Charles's silence only fueled speculation. The public saw hesitation as weakness. The monarchy's image crumbled with every passing hour. Ask yourself this. What does a king do when his very crown is threatened not by war, not by foreign powers, but by his own wife's words? Does he defend her and risk the monarchy collapsing under the weight of public outrage? Or does he sacrifice her, turning his marriage into collateral damage for the sake of survival? This was Charles's torment. And no matter which choice he made, the result would scar him forever. But here's the twist. As Charles agonized, as William pushed, as Camilla dug in, another voice emerged. Unexpected, unrelenting, and determined to keep Camilla in place. A voice Charles hadn't anticipated would side so firmly with her. And that voice changed everything. What happens when a son looks his father in the eye and dares to say what the entire nation is already whispering? When the heir to the throne, the man who will one day wear the crown, demands that the king make an impossible choice. That is exactly what happened when William intervened. The confrontation wasn't polite. It wasn't gentle. It was raw, emotional. A son furious on behalf of his mother. A son who had carried the trauma of Diana's death for nearly his entire life, only to see it mocked and diminished in the alleged writings of his stepmother. And when those words surfaced, I always knew Diana wouldn't last. She had to go. William reached his breaking point. Imagine the setting. A private room inside Clarence's house. Heavy curtains drawn, the air thick with tension. Charles sitting stiffly in an armchair, his hands clasped, his face lined with exhaustion. And William, taller, younger, his jaw set, his voice sharp with anger, standing over him. She's done enough damage, father. It's time. Not a suggestion, not a plea, an ultimatum. For William, this wasn't about politics. It wasn't about public perception. It was about his mother. Diana wasn't a figure in history books to him. She was his mother, the woman who comforted him, who shielded him, who died far too soon. To see Camilla allegedly dismiss her as if her death were inevitable, unforgivable. William had tolerated Camilla's presence for years, out of duty, out of necessity. But now, that fragile tolerance snapped. Let's pause here. Imagine the weight of those words on Charles. The son he'd raised, the heir he relied on, was now against him. The king was no longer facing just public outrage. He was facing a family rebellion. And for Charles, nothing could cut deeper. But here's where the contradictions begin. William's intervention wasn't universally welcomed inside the palace. Some courtiers whispered that William was being too emotional, too rash, that he was letting his personal feelings override the stability of the monarchy. Others, however, quietly cheered. They saw in William's fury the courage Charles lacked. To them, William wasn't destabilizing the monarchy, he was saving it. Now, let's ask the obvious question. Why did William speak out so forcefully? The answer lies in Diana's legacy. From the moment of her death, William has been her protector. He has spoken of her in reverent tones. He has raised his children to know her, to remember her. To him, honoring Diana's memory isn't just personal, it's sacred. And Camilla's alleged words weren't just cruel. They were blasphemy against that sacred memory. But William's intervention went beyond personal pain. It was strategic. He knew the monarchy couldn't survive with Camilla dragging it down. The people had turned. The polls were damning. Parliament was murmuring. If Charles didn't act, the entire institution could crumble. By confronting his father, William was also protecting the crown he would one day inherit. His words carried a double edge, a son defending his mother, and an heir safeguarding his future throne. And what about Harry? Where did he fit in? Reports swirled that he, too, had reacted furiously to the diary. But Harry was distant, estranged, his voice less influential within palace walls. It was William's stance that mattered most. He was the heir, the future king, and his intervention tipped the balance. Without William's push, Charles might have wavered indefinitely. With it, the king was forced to face the unbearable truth. The monarchy couldn't survive Camilla's scandal. Now picture the fallout of that conversation. Charles slumped in his chair, silent, perhaps muttering about loyalty, about love, about the years he and Camilla had endured together. But William's face remained unmoved. He had heard it all before. And this time, he wasn't budging. It's time, he repeated, his voice firm, final. For Charles, this was agony. To choose between his wife and his son. Between the woman he had sacrificed everything for and the son who embodied the future of the monarchy. Duty versus desire. Love versus legacy. It was Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson all over again, but with a twist. Edward gave up his crown for love. Charles was now being asked to give up love for his crown. And yet, William wasn't the only family member with an opinion. Another voice, one Charles didn't expect, would soon make itself heard. A voice that didn't echo William's fury but instead rose in defense of Camilla, demanding that the king resist the pressure, that he hold fast to the woman who had stood by him. And that defense, coming from such an unexpected place, would throw the entire palace into deeper chaos. What happens when the accused refuses to bow? When the woman at the center of a firestorm doesn't apologize, doesn't retreat, but digs in her heels and dares the world to push her off the throne? That was Camilla. Defiant, angry, unyielding. The diary scandal might have torn the monarchy apart, but Camilla wasn't about to surrender quietly. Not after everything she had clawed her way through to sit beside Charles as queen. Picture it. Behind the palace gates, aides whispered that Camilla was livid. Not heartbroken, not humbled, furious. To her, the diary wasn't proof of guilt. It was a weapon. A smear campaign designed to destroy her just when she had finally secured her crown. And Camilla had spent a lifetime surviving smear campaigns. She wasn't about to let this one win. She slammed her fist on tables. She snapped at staff. "I will not be sacrificed for Diana again," she allegedly fumed. That sentence alone reveals her mindset. In her eyes, this wasn't about truth. It wasn't even about the monarchy. It was about her versus Diana, again. The battle that had defined her life was back, and Camilla was determined not to lose round 2. But here's the contradiction. Defiance might win you battles in private, but in the public arena, it only fans the flames. While crowds chanted outside Buckingham Palace, while headlines branded her the Queen of Cruelty, Camilla remained silent to the people. No apology, no denial, nothing. That silence screamed louder than any statement ever could. And Charles? He was caught in the middle. Advisors begged him to persuade her to issue a statement, to at least show remorse. But Camilla refused. "If I bow to them now, I'm finished," she snapped. For her, compromise wasn't survival, it was death. Now let's talk about the irony here. For years, Camilla had been painted as the woman who played the long game. She endured humiliation, scandal, even ridicule, all with the promise that one day Charles would make her queen. And it worked. She had the crown. She had the title. But in that moment of crisis, her very stubbornness, the trait that got her there, became her downfall. The people didn't see a strong queen. They saw an arrogant one. And William? His anger only deepened. His plea to Charles, "It's time," clashed with Camilla's defiance. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Father against son, husband against heir, wife against the world. But then came the unexpected twist. Not everyone inside the family turned against Camilla. There were whispers that Princess and Charles's sister quietly backed her. And, known for her bluntness and loyalty, allegedly told Charles, "She stood by you longer than anyone. Don't throw her to the wolves." For Charles, that voice of support was like water in a desert. At least someone understood. And yet, that support only deepened the divide. With William pressing for Camilla's removal and urging Charles to stand firm, the king was pulled in opposite directions by the people he trusted most. His court fractured. His family fractured. His reign teetered on the edge. But Camilla wasn't finished. If the diary was her enemy, she was ready to fight back. Rumors spread that she considered doing a sit-down interview, Diana style, to set the record straight. Can you imagine the optics? The woman accused of mocking Diana's death, sitting under studio lights, trying to explain herself? Advisors panicked at the very idea. Some said it would destroy what little credibility she had left. Others argued it might humanize her. And here's where the danger lay. If Camilla spoke, she risked unleashing new storms. If she stayed silent, the public assumed guilt. She was trapped in a paradox. Defiance had carried her this far, but now it boxed her in. Meanwhile, the press uncovered more diary fragments. Nothing as damning as she had to go, but enough to paint a picture of disdain. Notes about Diana's fragility. Comments mocking her charity appearances. Small cruelties that added up to a devastating portrait. Each revelation fueled the outrage. Each new line tightened the noose. And yet, Camilla remained unbroken. She told Charles flatly, "If I go, you go too. They'll never stop with me." It was a threat, but also a truth. The monarchy wasn't just under siege because of Camilla. It was under siege because of Charles's choice to stand by her. If she fell, his judgment fell with her. So the question loomed larger than ever. Would Charles sacrifice his queen to save his crown? Or would he defy the nation, stand beside her, and risk dragging the monarchy down with them both? And just when it seemed the answer was clear, the storm spilled out of the palace and into Parliament. Politicians began to weigh in, demanding that the king act swiftly, decisively, and publicly. That was when Camilla's defiance met something stronger than her willpower, the combined force of the people and the state. What happens when the private shame of a royal family bursts through the palace gates and lands directly on the desks of politicians? When a scandal isn't just gossip anymore, but a matter of state. That's what happened next. The fury over Camilla's alleged diary entries didn't just stay in the tabloids. It roared into Parliament, the very heart of Britain's democracy. Suddenly, the monarchy wasn't battling angry crowds and screaming headlines. It was battling the machinery of government itself. Picture the scene. The House of Commons buzzing like a hornet's nest. MPs from across the political spectrum rising one by one, their voices shaking with anger, some out of genuine disgust, others sensing political opportunity. The monarchy must reflect the values of the people, declared one. Another went further, his words ringing across the chamber. If the king refuses to act, then what good is the monarchy to those it serves? Strong words, dangerous words, and they weren't just grandstanding for the cameras. These were warnings. Because here's the truth, the monarchy doesn't survive on crowns or jewels. It survives on consent, on public goodwill. Without it, the entire edifice collapses. Politicians know that. And when the public roared against Camilla, MPs saw which way the wind was blowing. To stay silent would make them complicit. To speak out would make them heroes. Guess which option they chose? Outside the Palace of Westminster, protesters gathered with placards showing Diana's smiling face. The People's Princess forever, they read. Others were blunter. Divorce now. Justice for Diana. The symbolism was brutal. Parliament, the people's house, was aligning with Diana's memory against the king's wife. Inside Buckingham Palace, panic spread. The king's private secretaries took frantic calls from government officials. Each message was the same. Do something. Do it quickly. Advisors warned Charles that if he didn't act soon, Parliament might formally debate the monarchy's role in public life. That wasn't just pressure. That was a threat. Now pause for a second and imagine how that felt to Charles. He had spent his entire life preparing to be king, waiting in Diana's shadow, enduring scandal after scandal. And now, just as he had finally secured the throne, the very government he served was hinting that his monarchy might not survive unless he sacrificed the woman he loved. History has a cruel sense of irony, doesn't it? But the pressure didn't come only from Westminster. Polls plastered across every newspaper showed numbers so stark they were impossible to ignore. One headline blared, 78% say Camilla must go. Another screamed, majority of Britons favor divorce. Numbers don't lie, and these numbers told Charles he was standing on quicksand. The royal press office scrambled to draft statements, but every draft felt hollow. How do you explain away the words she had to go? How do you spin venom into compassion? You can't, and the palace knew it. Each day without action only deepened the crisis. Each silence was seen as weakness. Meanwhile, MPs weren't done. Some began floating the unthinkable. What if Camilla kept her crown? What if the monarchy's credibility couldn't be salvaged? What if the public demanded not just her removal, but a wholesale rethinking of the monarchy itself? Those whispers echoed through the corridors of power, chilling even the staunchest royalists. And here's where the irony hits hardest. The monarchy, that centuries-old institution meant to unite the nation, was now dividing it. On one side, loyalists clinging to tradition, insisting that Charles and Camilla remain untouched. On the other, reformists and the public, furious that a woman they despised sat on the throne once meant for Diana. It was more than scandal, it was existential. Charles held emergency meetings with senior aides. Some urged him to make a bold statement, distancing himself from Camilla without filing for divorce, perhaps by sending her away quietly. Others argued only divorce could appease the nation, but each option carried risk. Divorce would devastate him personally. Silence would devastate him politically, and he had no time left to deliberate. The press captured every stumble, every hesitation. King paralyzed, screamed one headline. Nation demands action, Charles wavers, cried another. The image of a dithering monarch was fatal. Kings must be decisive, strong. Charles looked weak. And through it all, Camilla remained unrepentant. Her defiance behind closed doors clashed brutally with the tidal wave outside. She refused to resign herself to exile. She insisted that if she fell, Charles's reign would collapse with her. And maybe she was right. After all, what would it say about the king if he abandoned his wife under pressure? Wouldn't that make him look weak, cowardly, faithless? But here's the paradox. Standing by her made him look worse. The monarchy was trapped in a double bind, damned if it acted, damned if it didn't. And Parliament, sensing this weakness, pushed harder. Reports swirled that a private letter from senior MPs had reached the palace, urging the king to place the stability of the monarchy above personal affection. That letter changed everything. Because once politicians crossed the line from subtle hints to written demands, Charles could no longer pretend this was just a scandal. It was now a constitutional crisis. The king was under siege, not just from his people, not just from his son, but from his own government. The question was no longer if he would act, but how. And when the decision finally came, it shook the monarchy to its core. What does it sound like when a monarchy cracks? Not in whispers, not in murmurs, but in a thunderous declaration that reverberates across the world. That was the sound the moment King Charles announced he would file for divorce from Queen Camilla. The news didn't leak slowly through whispers in the press. It hit like a bombshell. The palace issued a terse statement, brief but devastating. His Majesty the King has taken steps to dissolve his marriage to Queen Camilla, effective immediately, in order to preserve the dignity and stability of the crown. No elaboration, no excuses, just cold, royal finality. And in that moment, history shifted. Think about the irony. Charles had spent decades fighting for Camilla. He endured the humiliation of the Tampongate tapes. He endured the scorn of a public that saw her as the other woman. He endured Diana's televised confession that there were 3 of us in this marriage. And yet, after clawing his way to the throne with Camilla at his side, he was now the one cutting her loose. For duty, for survival, for the crown. The fallout was instant. Cameras flashed outside Buckingham Palace. Crowds erupted into cheers and chants of justice for Diana. Outside Kensington Palace, where Diana once lived, flowers piled high again, as though her spirit had triumphed. In pubs across Britain, people raised glasses in her name. It wasn't just a divorce. It was seen as Diana's final victory from beyond the grave. And yet, inside the palace, the mood was somber. Divorce for a reigning monarch isn't just personal, it's seismic. It shakes the foundations of tradition. It raises uncomfortable echoes of Edward VIII, who gave up his crown for Wallis Simpson. But Charles hadn't abdicated for love. He had abdicated love for his crown, and that irony would define his reign forever. The press, of course, had a field day. Front pages screamed with historic headlines. Camilla cast out. Charles chooses crown over love. Diana's revenge complete. Commentators filled the airwaves, dissecting every word of the statement, every nuance of Charles's body language in the days that followed. Some sympathized with him, a man forced to sacrifice his happiness once again. Others saw him as weak, a monarch unable to control his own house. And Camilla? Her fury was volcanic. Behind closed doors, sources claimed she accused Charles of betrayal, of cowardice, of throwing her to the wolves to save himself. "I stood by you when no one else would," she allegedly screamed. "And this is how you repay me?" Can you feel the sting of those words? Camilla wasn't just losing her marriage. She was losing the war she had fought for half a century. But here's where it gets even darker. Divorce wasn't just about personal betrayal. It was about survival strategy. Palace insiders whispered that advisors had laid out the numbers for Charles in stark terms. With Camilla, his approval rating was collapsing into the 20s. Without her, it surged overnight to nearly 60%. The monarchy wasn't just bruised, it was hemorrhaging. And Charles knew he had to act quickly or risk presiding over its collapse. The decision also sent shockwaves through the royal family. William, by all accounts, was relieved. Some said he privately told his father, "You've done the right thing." For him, the divorce wasn't just justice for Diana. It was the cleansing of a wound that had festered for decades. Harry, however, reacted differently. Estranged from the family, he saw it as yet another example of the monarchy sacrificing people for image. "First my mother, now Camilla," he allegedly remarked. The brothers, divided once more, even in a moment of supposed unity. And what about the Commonwealth? Leaders across the globe weighed in. In Australia, Republican movements seized on the scandal, arguing that the monarchy was broken beyond repair. In Canada, public debates erupted about whether the king still held moral authority. The divorce, far from saving the monarchy, risked weakening its grip across the world. But for Charles, the calculation was simple. With Camilla, the monarchy dies. Without her, it limps forward. So he chose the crown. And yet, there was one last twist. Because while the public celebrated Camilla's downfall, she wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Camilla had secrets, influence, and a platform. And those who knew her best whispered that she would not go quietly into the night. The divorce may have been announced. The marriage may have ended. But Camilla's war against the monarchy had only just begun. And what she did next threatened to drag the royal family into an even deeper abyss. What happens when a woman who has spent her entire life being branded as the villain refuses to accept her final act as exile? When she decides, instead, to launch one last desperate counterattack against the crown itself. That was Camilla after the divorce bombshell. The palace may have stripped her of title, standing, and public legitimacy, but what they could not strip was her will. And if there was one thing Camilla Parker Bowles had proven again and again, it was that she was a survivor. In the days immediately following the announcement, silence enveloped her. No statement, no public citing, no denial, just quiet. But that quiet wasn't surrender, it was calculation. Behind closed doors, Camilla was plotting. Furious, humiliated, betrayed, she refused to go down in history as the monster who mocked Diana's death. If Charles and his advisors thought she would vanish gracefully into the background, they were dead wrong. Whispers emerged quickly. Camilla was reaching out to sympathetic journalists. She was allegedly considering a sit-down interview, her own version of Diana's panorama moment, where she could tell her side of the story. Can you imagine the optics? The former queen consort, branded as heartless, looking into the camera and insisting she had been framed, manipulated, targeted by shadowy forces within the palace? Advisors feared it would be catastrophic. But to Camilla, it was a lifeline, her chance to reclaim control. And here's the chilling part. She didn't just deny the diary's authenticity. She hinted that the leak itself was orchestrated. A palace conspiracy. A deliberate effort to erase her. To paint her as the eternal villain so that Diana's legacy could rise unchallenged and William's succession could be spotless. They've made me the scapegoat, she allegedly told a confidant. If the monarchy needed my blood, they've got it. But I'll take others down with me. That wasn't the cry of a broken woman. That was a declaration of war. Her lawyers began drafting letters, demanding retractions, threatening lawsuits against publications that printed the diary excerpts. One tabloid editor scoffed, "Let her try. Truth or not, the public has already judged her." And that was the real battle Camilla faced. Not the courts, not the press, the court of public opinion. And in that arena, she was already guilty. Still, Camilla had allies. Powerful ones. Whispers suggested that certain members of the aristocracy, old friends from her pre-royal days, still backed her. They despised Diana's sainthood. They resented William's moral high ground. To them, Camilla was the wronged party, used by Charles, vilified by the press, discarded by the monarchy. These allies whispered encouragement. Fight back. Tell your story. Don't let them bury you alive. And so Camilla began to maneuver. A leak here, a rumor there. Carefully placed stories about her years of loyalty to Charles, about how she had sacrificed her privacy, her dignity, even her health to stand by his side. Stories painting her not as cruel, but as long-suffering. It was her counteroffensive, her attempt to rewrite the narrative before history locked it in stone. But here's the contradiction. Every time Camilla defended herself, every time she insisted she was the victim, it only reminded the public of the diary itself. The words couldn't be erased. She had to go. Those 4 words echoed louder than anything she could say. To many, every protest sounded like deflection. Every denial, an excuse. And that only fueled the anger. Charles, meanwhile, washed with dread. His advisors begged him to ignore her, to let her destroy herself. But Charles was torn. Whatever the scandal, whatever the fury, this was still the woman he had loved for most of his life. To see her lash out, to see her unravel, it broke him. And yet, he couldn't intervene. Not anymore. The monarchy had made its choice. And so had he. Now let's ask the unsettling question. What did Camilla still hold? What secrets could she unleash? Because make no mistake, a woman who had been inside the palace for decades didn't leave empty-handed. Letters, conversations, intimate details about Charles, about William, about the institution itself. If she chose to, Camilla could burn it all down. And some insiders whispered that was exactly her plan. A scorched earth exit. If she couldn't wear the crown, she would tarnish it forever. The press smelled blood. Rumors circulated that Camilla was preparing a tell-all memoir. Imagine the chaos. Camilla's voice on every page, countering Diana's story, exposing the monarchy's hidden fractures. Whether true or not, the speculation itself was poison. The monarchy braced for impact. But here's the cruel irony. For all her defiance, for all her plotting, Camilla couldn't escape the shadow of Diana. Every attempt to defend herself only reignited comparisons. Diana's warmth versus Camilla's steel. Diana's compassion versus Camilla's calculation. In the eyes of the world, Camilla could never win. She had been cast in the role of villain decades ago. And villains don't get redemption arcs. Still, Camilla's defiance mattered. Because it prevented the monarchy from tying the scandal neatly in a bow. Her refusal to vanish ensured the crisis dragged on. Headlines kept rolling. Protests kept swelling. Politicians kept circling. The monarchy couldn't heal because Camilla wouldn't let it. And then, just when it seemed her fury had reached its peak, whispers emerged of another set of diary entries. Not yet published. Not yet confirmed. Entries that, if true, contained far darker implications than anything seen before. Entries that didn't just mock Diana, but hinted at knowledge.